What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here. In this video, I will just be breaking down everything that was discussed in the DCP live podcast last night and how it affects the sandbox coming in Witch Queen. This will just be an informational video with some 0-hour gameplay in the background, so enjoy the nostalgia hit and feel free to listen to all the changes. So first of all, huge shout out to the DCP crew and Kevin Yanis and Samuel Dunn from Bungie for joining the podcast and answering all the questions and being super transparent. And shout out to the various creators for all the great questions that they asked. With that out of the way, we'll give a general overview of some changes before we get into class-specific changes. So first of all, a huge thing that was mentioned towards the end of the podcast was that it is an explicit goal from Bungie to make these subclasses more desirable to play. This was in reference to a question about if Void is likely going to dominate the Crucible. We have had Stasis in our hands for over a year now, and we know the kind of build crafting you can get with the 3.0 version of these subclasses rather than the Diamond nodes. So yes, Top Tree Dawnblade will still be strong, but if players know what they are doing and how to spec into a certain kit, then these subclasses can be quite dominant. Which is fine, because in the next year, Solar and Arc will be onboarded to 3.0 versions as well. So really, this is just growing pains that we will have to deal with to reach a very desirable end goal in my opinion. The next statement I want to highlight was once again from Kevin Yanis, as he talked about the ability to weapon play split in PvP. They did want to tone down ability spam, which from the Crucible I have played since the 30th anniversary sandbox update, they have achieved. Super spam is less, and I can be one shot behind cover now and not inevitably get hit by a grenade because people generally do not have their abilities as much. But one thing he hit on was that they don't want to be like an 80-20 split on weapons to abilities. He specifically said that space magic is what makes Destiny Destiny and differentiates it from other shooter games out there. I wholly appreciate this statement because it tells me two things. Bungie has a vision for their game and will make it the way they want to make it, and they are sticking true to their vision of what makes Destiny different rather than trying to copy other games. Recently, Battlefield 2042 released and flopped in large part because they ignored what their true fans loved about Battlefield. And instead, they tried to copy Call of Duty and try to appeal to a wider player base when they effectively just pissed off their loyal players. So it was a huge sigh of relief to hear that statement. Anyways, with that out of the way, let us hit on general Void changes first. The first big one that I found very intriguing is that if I understand it correctly, all classes will be able to have some form of Devour. They didn't go into too much detail, but they did mention this. Next, all classes, I believe, will have access to all the Void grenades. That is what it sounded like. So Spike, Void Wall, Vortex, Magnetic, Suppression, Scatter, Axion Bolt. Only the Warlock grenades can be charged up, meaning Vortex, Scatter, and Axion, and if you charge a Magnetic grenade, it acts as a handheld supernova. But from what I understand, all classes can use every grenade. Additionally, Suppressor grenades have the longest cooldown of all the grenades, and in PvP, they now only suppress for 5 seconds instead of 10. Additionally, Vortex grenades now have a pull-in effect, and charged scatter grenade tracking has been adjusted, so nothing manacles could have more viability. He specifically mentioned charge grenades, so I'm not sure about the regular version of the scatter grenade. Additionally, it sounds like all classes have some way to go invisible. Hunter can master it and use it the most, but all classes will be able to. They have given new animations to characters to give a lot of these changes a specific identity. For instance, the Hunter dodge animation has changed. It is now the same whether you run Gambler's Dodge or Marksman Dodge, but the benefits are the same as they are now. Marksman will still reload and Gamblers will give you your melee charge back. But the animation is now the same for both, and the animation is different from how either of them are now. The Titan Bastion Barricade also has a different animation and gives them a purple hue to show they have a Void overshield. More on this later. Next, Void 3.0 is available with Witch Queen, but certain fragments will not be unlocked until after the Witch Queen raid is complete. Depending what aspects you are running, you can slot up to 4 fragments, and this is true for every class. New Light players will have to unlock Void 3.0 as they go through the New Light quest, where veteran players will get, and I quote, the whole shebang aside from the aforementioned fragments that will not be available until later in Season 16. They mentioned that Overshield will be the domain of Stasis and Void. This means that we will likely not have any ways to get an Overshield with Solar or Arc. We will see about healing grenades on Middle Tree Dawnblade in the future, I guess. But they did mention how they want subclasses to have a main identity. In this same vein, they mentioned that Void is about the manifestation of gravity, and that weakens will probably be exclusive to Void in the future. So something like Hammer Strike debuff may go away. I'm not sure what they will do with Divinity. It for sure is not changing right now, as that was specifically asked. but it also seems to debuff in a different way than things like tether or tractor cannon, which may explain why it was able to stack with particle deconstruction this year when other debuffs did not. They mentioned how Ruinous Effigy can trigger Void 3.0 status effects. They mentioned a fragment called Volatile Rounds. Presumably Void weapons can debuff maybe? I'm not sure. But they did mention how the Ruinous Effigy Ball counts as weapon damage. I actually knew this as I tried stacking melee buffs with it and it does not work. Also, Font of Might, which increases weapon damage, already works with this. I actually have a whole Void 3.0 preview coming right before Witch Queen that specifically uses this weapon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. It is an extremely powerful build already and is sure to only get better. I can't put it out yet though because I am still finding out information like this to add to the video. Expect it to be out after next week's TWAB. Another thing they mentioned was how these new subclass trees give them the ability to adjust these subclasses much more easily in the future. They were too confined with the diamond style tree. This is just a generally great statement for the future of subclasses and changes we could see down the road. Like, look how easily they were able to address an outlier like Whisper of Hedrons. This gives them way more flexibility. Next, let's talk about super cooldowns. Some super cooldowns have changed. Bubble is now the fastest cooldown at tier 5, Deadfall is tier 4, Mobius Quiver is tier 3, both Nova Bombs are tier 3, and then Behemoth, Shadebinder, and Fist of Havoc have gotten shorter cooldowns by moving from tier 1 to tier 2. Arc Staff went the other way, moving from tier 3 to tier 2, so a longer cooldown, and Dawnblade moved from tier 2 to tier 1. In Void 3.0, selecting the super you want will be as easy as selecting your grenade or class ability. Also, Hunters and Titans will not be getting Blink. I think that is really all for general changes to subclasses as a whole. So now let's dive into specifics of the classes. I will go in the order they did on the podcast, so we will start with Hunters. First off, they mentioned that the class identity of the Hunter is to specialize in invisibility and weaken. Trapper's Ambush, which I believe is a new melee ability, applies a 15% debuff to enemies in PvE and a 7.5% debuff in PvP. This debuff does not stack with things like Tether, so if you apply a Tether, the 30% debuff overrides this debuff. Trapper's Ambush can also apply invisibility to you and your teammates. Heart of the Pack will no longer be a thing in Void 3.0. Keen Scout and Lockdown will be fragments. Flawless Execution has become Stylish Execution. I don't know the functionality of Stylish Execution, but they confirm that a crouching headshot will no longer proc Flawless Execution. I already mentioned the dodge animation change before, but the dodge animation is now the same for Marksman and Gambler's Dodge, but they retain their current functionality. Tether now responds much more quickly, which has been a pain point for ages. Let's hope it actually stops the super in its tracks now, rather than allowing them to kill us before we suppress them. Also, the super Mobius Quiver is changing. It now shoots 2 volleys of 3 tethers, and if you are running the exotic Orpheus rigs, you will get 1 extra volley. So now you will shoot 3 tethers instead of just 2. Even though these tethers shoot a volley of 3 different tethers, the tethers can actually track to a single target, so this may make them very strong for DPS. Lastly, Khepri's Sting will still work with Trapper's Ambush. Those were all the main takeaways for the Hunters. Next, we have the Titans. They mentioned that the Titan's specialty is Overshield. They're kind of the protector of the group. The first big one is that the Void Overshield is somewhat different than a regular Overshield. I don't have a ton of details on this, but they specifically mention that. They talk a lot about verbs and how they apply, such as a capital W weaken for instance. So think how Divinity is a debuff, but not the same type of debuff as Tether or Tractor Cannon. It doesn't suppress in the same way. That is how I understand it anyways. So with this disclaimer out of the way, the Titan Void Overshield that you get from Bastion, the new barricade animation, is specifically a Void Overshield. It gives damage resistance, but only in PvE. It also gives an Overshield which is plus 45 to your health bar, where something like Icefall Mantles I believe is plus 100 to your Overshield. Additionally, this is just Overshield health. It does not heal you. So if you are one shot, you will get a quick plus 45 to your health from your Overshield, but if you lose that Overshield quickly and haven't regenerated your health yet, you will still be one shot. Also, when you have this Void Overshield, you will have a purple hue to your character. They mentioned a Barney squad. Again, this comes back to the animations they want to create to give class identities, something that you could recognize in PvP, like, oh, that guy is a Sentinel Titan because he has a Void Overshield. Next for the Titans are their 2 melees. They have Shield Bash and Shield Throw. Shield Bash essentially functions the same as it does now, and it can still suppress. It also now weakens enemies. Presumably the same as Hunter, which is 15% in PvE and 7.5% in PvP, but that is speculation on my part as they did not confirm this. It also has a detonation effect, so it can hit nearby enemies when you shield bash. The shield throw does 60 damage in PvP. The utility of it is offset by its low damage. They specifically mentioned how strong shurikens and celestial fire were. Too much utility for how hard they hit. The shield throw also has less tracking than its super counterpart, but it sounds like it still does bounce off targets. And apparently it gives a small overshield when it deals damage, but the overshield is not a full overshield like it is from defensive strike. Next, we have the big announcement that got Twitter super fired up today. Bubble now has a faster cast animation, but Weapons of Light has been nerfed from 35% to 25%. I was quite shocked by this. The reasoning was that you are more protected in a bubble than a well, which is true, but you also can't shoot out of a bubble. I also know Banner Shield gives a weapon buff, but don't know it offhand. If anyone does, comment down below and let me know. They didn't mention if that buff was getting touched, but back to the bubble, its damage resistance is still tied to resilience, which was a change they made to well and bubble with the 30th anniversary update. So this is a big nerf for sure. I would like to remind everyone that 3 Argent Ordnance mods gives rockets a 35% buff, and Lucent Blade is also a 35% buff. They never mentioned these getting touched as the topic was all Void 3.0, but I am curious if they will. I will probably do some testing when Witch Queen launches and find out, but these could be more valuable than ever due to the nerf. One thing is for sure is it certainly makes the Well of Radiance the king for DPS phases now. Another thing I am curious of is if Font of Might will still stack. It seems that they want to potentially rein in damage buffs. On this topic, something I forgot to mention off the rip is in the future, they are trying to get away from things like Breach and Clear, Particle Deconstruction, and Oppressive Darkness. Probably because those debuffs essentially made Hunter Tethers useless in those seasons. But back to the Titan changes. Resupply health regen is now in the Controlled Demolition aspect. This perk currently gives health and melee and grenade energy when your void detonators explode. No backup plans was brought up specifically, and it now gives a void overshield. That was really all they had for Titans. The big news is obviously the nerf to Bubble. Lastly, we have the Warlocks. They mentioned them being the specialist in Devour. So let's talk about Devour. Devour is sticking around, but it is changing a little bit. So first off, you cannot consume your grenade anymore because they needed that animation for the charge with Chaos Accelerant. So instead, any void ability kill will proc Devour. The timer you get for Devour is also changing. They said the timer depends on the type of ability kill. So maybe a super will give 10 seconds versus a grenade giving 5. Once it is procced, the timer is now extended instead of refreshed. So before, if you had 1 second on your timer and got a kill, it was right back up to 10 seconds. Now, the timer presumably adds a couple seconds. They didn't say how much because it depends apparently. It sounds like there is a fragment that can give you more time back for kills. Again, this is speculation from deducing what they said in the podcast, but that sounds like how it works. They also said the max timer they think is 17 seconds, so we'll have to get our hands on it to see exactly how it plays. And on that note, again, I have an amazing build preview coming out in about a week that will break all this stuff down. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. It is insanely strong. Moving on, they talked about the Devouring Legs Warlock exotic that were previewed in the Vidoc. They couldn't remember for sure, but they think it only works on the Void subclass. Pocket Singularity is a new Warlock melee. It applies volatile, it has shortest range, and a pushback detonation when the projectile blows up. What is neat about this is it pushes depending on the angle it hits someone. So if a hunter is jumping, you can boop them into the air. And if a guy is on a ledge, you can push him off. It's also great for knocking back shotgun rushers. So it sounds like it has some pretty cool utility. Also, it does not work on yourself or on your teammates. Those were the main takeaways from Warlock. I will link the podcast in the description of this video if you are interested in checking it out. I should also mention that at the end, they said they weren't 100% certain on everything, but that patch notes with the 100% correct information will be released before Witch Queen. So when that comes out, you can get the exact information you want. But these guys worked very closely on Void 3.0, so I'm sure most of the information was quite accurate. Could just be minor discrepancies here and there. As well as from me. I could have interpreted things they said differently from what they actually meant. I just wanted to make this video because I was seeing stuff all over Twitter that Bubble was nerfed, and I thought it was weird that I hadn't read about it. So I watched the whole podcast and took notes so I could condense all the sandbox changes that are coming in case you were interested. So I hope that this video helped you out. It certainly helped me to know what to expect when Void 3.0 comes out. I'm honestly getting more excited for it by the day. If this video helped you out, then a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. And once again, thanks to the Bungie devs for giving us an early glimpse into the new sandbox. I think I speak for everyone when I say we appreciate it greatly and we can't wait to get our hands on Void 3.0. Take care, Guardians.